Hey, Lisa, happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Things to talk about on Valentine's Day that I think are super important are the California Bar Association's Privacy Summit yesterday.
Not
Have you got
yesterday, late last week. Late last week, but it
last
feels
week,
like
late last week?
yesterday.
Tell us what happened there. Like, what'd you find out? Who was there? What'd you guys talk about?
Sure. There's a lot of conferences. I think this one was pretty unique. It's the second year they've done it. The California Bar Association had their privacy summit. And to me, what was most useful is you had nearly all of the California Privacy Protection Agency there. You had major representation from the California Attorney General's office. And then you had so many other representatives from other state AG offices, Washington, Connecticut, Colorado, Oregon. It was, and just the conversations and the topics, priorities, really useful insights.
Yeah, getting the idea like, over the past 2 years that you don't look at state AGs as kind of individual states doing their own thing. They really kind of coordinate and talk. And I don't know how much the action is coordinated, but certainly some of the themes are. What did they talk about? Like what came up?
So priorities, that was a big question. What can we expect this year? And so while there definitely is a lot of attempts to harmonize where possible, I think there's also some states have their unique priorities. So they don't all talk kind of in one voice, but kids, teen data, that was a big issue. Just thinking about how do you communicate with kids and teens from a notice perspective, but also how are you using their data? How are you engaging with them in connection with use of their data? So I think we're going to see a whole lot of that this year. Transparency, notice. We heard that from the head of the enforcement for the California Privacy Protection Agency. They're going to be testing on looking at your privacy notices. Do they say what they need to say? Are there any dark patterns in how you communicate those rights? And then big interest in, well, what's going on behind the scenes? So some pressure testing, and we talk about accountability a lot, but I think that is a big aspect that we're going to see this year of you say you delete, what is really happening behind the scenes, and can you demonstrate that?
Yeah, I think back to Commissioner Bedoya's keynote at the IAPP last April, and he talked about transparency and accountability, and that were like really hot themes. And we saw a lot around transparency. And I think because, right, some of these bodies, like the FTC and others, like the New York AG, they can go after deceptive and misleading conduct, even if there isn't a federal privacy law or New York privacy law.
Right.
And it seems to be the place to do it. And I don't hear a ton on accountability. So I wanted to ask you two questions, Elise. So one, like, is that enough? Just looking at deceptive and misleading conduct, what else could you do if there was something more specific? Or actually, is there just a lot of power there? And then secondly, what does it mean to be accountable? Okay, like how do they enforce that? What does the brand need to do?
I think it's the combination, right? So you've got the Federal Trade Commission who has the Section 5 unfair and deceptive trade practices, and they've used that over, just so many examples in the privacy and data context and have been able to flex those muscles to account for new technology, emerging uses of data. So it hasn't seemed to hold them back. Now, would they prefer to have extra tools in terms of like monetary remedies and fines? Perhaps, but it hasn't stopped them from pretty aggressively going after companies and putting them under pretty robust orders that then regulate their conduct going forward. And that's just the federal level, right? We have all these state AGs. We have an entire privacy agency in California where they've got enough people within there that actually rivals the FTC's Consumer Protection Bureau. So I think as a business, you have so many layers of who you're looking to regulate. And reality is you usually don't have one business practice in California and another one in Connecticut and another one in Colorado. As we think about risk assessments, like what's the worst that could happen? And from a business standpoint, like that's a decent amount of accountability if you have to prove that, if you have to, really walk that walk on if you actually get tagged by a regulator or whatnot. What are you going to do in that circumstance? What are you going to point to show that you're in compliance?
Yeah, gotcha. And I mean, this year seems like it's going to be hot for that.
Well, we've been saying
Yeah.
accountability for a long time. And I think the alarm has been sounded, and I think we're just going to see a lot more examples of these enforcements. And the message is really clear from that. And every time you see one of these cases, these settlements, the press releases, like that is a signal from the regulator on, hey, you should look at your practices on the same issue. You should look at the complaint allegations in terms of what this company did that was problematic, and then think about it. What are you doing, and how far apart are your practices from those that got in trouble?
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about was Gillibrand, New York Standard, I had a little opinion piece in The Hill where she called for a federal data protection office in the context of all this enforcement that's happening anyway, right? And it's happening not even really in privacy laws, in deceptive conduct and misleading conduct laws, fair practices laws. What do you think's behind that? Would it help to have a data protection office at a federal level, even if there isn't a federal privacy law?
If you look at other countries, they do have that. And I think what they don't typically have is something exactly like the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which has Bureau of Competition, Bureau of Economics, and Bureau of Consumer Protection, which accounts for privacy and data practices. And there's so much with data protection that is consumer protection. So I think number one, it's not that there's a gap. We do have a regulator that has subject matter expertise, but I think number two, there is so much in privacy and the resources that it really deserves. I think that's the question on, should a regulator be full-time focused on data protection, right? There's not that many, you think about it, there's not that many timekeepers, attorneys within the privacy division at the FTC. Their budget has to account for a whole lot of other things. So that gets spread pretty thinly. So I think it's a resource issue, but we've not gotten agreement on a federal privacy law, let alone putting together a budget to create a new administrative agency. I mean, I think from a bipartisan perspective, that's a tough haul. The last time we did that was during the financial crisis when we had the CFPB, right? There was that big triggering moment that launched that.
Really interesting, like seeing where data protection / consumer protection is in regulators' priorities, especially when there isn't like a dedicated privacy team. Like thinking back to Kelly Dry's webinar where Paul Singer was talking to Letitia James, and it was up there for her. You know, for her to jump on that call and say, "Hey, listen, well, yeah, we have a consumer protection team, but me personally as the AG want to come and tell you how important this is to me," seems to be huge relative to probably everything else they have going on.
Well, I mean, I think you're taking a pulse of the moment, right? State attorneys general, they represent the constituents of their state, the residents of their state, and privacy, data dignity, those issues are now really front and center. They're in the news. We interact so much online, and so much of our whole personhood, right? Like we were talking about like neural biometrics, right? So much that is just so specifically you that requires privacy attention. That, of course, is going to be a priority for the state AGs, even if they don't have a comprehensive privacy law. And I think that's something like a lot of folks miss because, as we talked about, the states talk to each other. They have the monthly, if not more frequent calls. And I think that's another thing we might see this year is perhaps multi-state action on privacy issues.
That's what I liked about Gillibrand's piece in The Hill, and we'll post it in the links below. But it wasn't as much about having a federal data protection office. I mean, yeah, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. But it was more that when she started talking about, hey, what's coming when it comes to AI and biometrics and facial recognition, the potential for harm is huge. And if we don't start talking about these things today, it's just going to slip away.
Yeah, I mean, I will push back a little bit on that because again, at the FTC, you have Office of Technology that is putting out, a lot of content on AI and has like their privacy con every year with all this research. So I think effort is happening in there. Perhaps it doesn't get as much of a spotlight because it is sharing it with so many other topics that the agency covers, but there is attention on that at the federal level.
Oh yeah, right. But it's in the zeitgeist. Like
Yes.
this is something we all need to be. Maybe it's outside of these regulator forums that we need to be talking about it as well.
Now that is true. Repetition is key.
Yeah. All right, Lisa. Thanks. Well, have a good Valentine's Day. I'm sure you'll be talking with your partner about all these issues.
Oh yeah, hot topics. All right. Take care.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks.